Hello and welcome to episode 192 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike. My name is Stanislav here in Chicago, and with me on the line, also from Chicago, but really the suburbs, it's the Godfather, Dave Harbarger.
Stan, I have one thing to say to you today. Shana Tova, my friend.
Shana Tova. I put the emphasis elsewhere. I say Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Well, I'm looking at the web, and it has the second syllables are in capital letters. But I hope, as your Gentile friend, I can say that to you on your New Year's.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the allyship. Thank you. It's been a good New Year. I've had a lot of challah, a lot of apple and honey. It's been good. My wife and I had a little bet recently about the exact pronunciation, and I reached out to one of my best friends who's Orthodox, and I asked him the right pronunciation, and he goes, well, it turns out they're both right, and it depends on whether or not you're Yiddish or Israeli.
Perfect. I'm good either way.
There you go. Shane is gone this week.
He's missing New Year's.
He's missing the New Year. Or maybe he's celebrating in Italy.
Yeah. Well-known Jewish homeland of Italy.
That's right. Shane, we miss you. Shane's gone this episode and next episode, but we think he'll be back in time for 194.
Yeah.
If he catches his flight, at least.
And how could he leave us with the keys to the house? Crazy David, yeah. Crazy Stan, here we are. You know it.
Yeah. With Shane gone, things are going to get a little fast and loose in Dive Down headquarters. We have a long breakdown and a short dive down this week. Maybe it's more of a long breakdown, no dive down, and a casual wind down. Shane's gone, so we don't have to categorize these things.
Yeah, you know what? We don't have any rules. It's all rules just right. No rules just right here now. Not all rules. All rules just right would be kind of weird.
We're post-structure. Like postmodernism is dead. Post-structuralism is, I think, the future of podcasting.
Certainly.
That's right.
People don't care about the chapters. We had comments of people complaining about the chapters before, so guess what? They're gone. It's just a nice show now.
And this week's nice show is about a couple of things. First, we're going to start with a recap of NRG Minneapolis. We're going to talk a bit about the Modern main event, as well as a little bit on the Pioneer 5K that happened on Sunday.
Yeah, as is our purview, being the official podcast of the Nerd Rage Gaming Championship Series. Hello, everybody. Please help Norm and the crew at NRG, and also check out this dive down we're about to do on that tournament. It's a great tournament. Really interesting top 8 in particular, I think.
Absolutely. And from what I heard, a certain mostly modern casual spike podcast was pretty on the nose with the anticipated results versus the actual results. But I think we'll get into that.
Yeah. Let's talk. Well, I can't wait to talk about it because what's a prediction? Is it a joke about the future, or is it a real thing?
Then we've got, a quasi-wind dive down-ish. Because Dave and I wanted to play something in anticipation of this week's episode, we weren't necessarily sure how long the NRG component of the show is going to be. We decided we're going to do a little bit of unique challenge-oriented playtesting. Challenge for ourselves. We did not play any challenges, unless Dave did, and I don't know about it. We decided we're going to play some decks that we've never tried before, individually. I picked a deck I've never played. Dave picked a deck that he's never played. And we're just going to share some quick and dirty experiences from those games.
I do think we should reveal the decks to help people who don't want to sit through the meta breakdown maybe go ahead and know what we're going to do if they're listening this long. And so I chose to play Mono Green Ramp, Rakdos Ramp, Bant Ramp, depending on what you call it now in Pioneer. First time, long time, I guess.
Nice. And I chose to play Teamer Scapeshift in Modern. I've never resolved the Scapeshift until preparation for this episode, and it was hard.
Yeah.
Hard to cast that card.
Guess what else is hard to play? Mono Green Ramp in Pioneer, kinda.
Yeah, so if you just want to hear us fumble through these powerful but difficult decks, fast forward to whatever timestamp we've indicated in the show notes, or stick around for the NRG recap. We'd love to have you either way. Before all that, though, let's housekeep. We've got a new patron, JJ. Thanks, JJ. JJ, you rock. We love you.
J-Rock. Thank you.
Also, shout out to Josh T for going up a tier in their patronage. Thanks, Josh.
That's awesome. Worth noting, patrons, people who have joined, we are pretty much up to date with swag for people. If you've joined in the last month, I believe, we still have not gotten swag out to you. But everybody else up to then, we have at least tried to send your packages to you. I had 5 boxes returned, 5 orders of deck boxes returned. I don't think any of Stan's packages of deck boxes and playmats were returned. And Shane, before he left us for a while, went through and caught up on all the people who were owed tokens, stickers, deck boxes, etc. So we should be good, America and the rest of the world. But
well,
let us know.
I think we only ship to America and North America this time around.
Yes, we should be good, America. Rest of the world, we will be coming for you once Shane gets back from the rest of the world.
That's the plan, yes. If you'd like to support our show and get in on all of this swag bag goodness, you can find our Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown. You can, of course, support our show while playing Magic as well with the Mana Trader subscription. Promo code TheDiveDown15. It gets you 10% off. It makes sense if you don't focus on the numbers too much. 10% off your first 2 months of a Mana Trader subscription.
If we're known for one thing, it's not focusing on the numbers too much here at the Dive
right.
Down.
Yeah. And of course, we're about to talk about NRG. We're the official podcast of the NRG series. You can participate in NRG tournaments, or you can participate in your own local tournaments. You're going to need paper cards, and you can get a discount when you buy them from Nerd Rage Gaming. If you use promo code DIVE8, it'll get 8% off your order from NRG.
That's right. And finally, if you'd like to check out lovely skincare, shaving, and soap products from Barrister and Mann, we'll talk about them more later, but you can use the code Barrister, or you can use the code TheDiveDown15 at Barrister and Mann to get 15% off your first order from them. More to come on that. All right, here we are. It's cold. It's cold in September. I don't know why. We're in a giant mall. There's a roller coaster in it. Where am I? Where am I, Stan? Tell me where I am.
I believe you're in the Mall of America.
And where's that?
In sunny Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Yeah, it's always sunny in Minneapolis, is what I heard. It's a good TV show.
I've also heard that every intersection is a 4-way stop sign of just very polite people who want to let you pass, but you're trying to let them pass. Traffic is at a standstill.
Yeah, that's Minnesota nice, I heard.
Now, I don't think the tournament was actually held at the Mall of America, but who knows? Maybe there's some empty storefronts that they needed to occupy. You and I played a tournament at a mall.
I was just going to say,
an empty storefront
at a mostly empty mall in an empty storefront. Thanks to local tournament organizers here in Chicago, Pastime. That was literally the day before the world shut down from COVID. Maybe like 3 days before. It was a bit strange.
Yeah. But we're not talking about Pastimes. We're talking about Nerd Rage.
Yep.
And they had another Nerd Rage series trial tournament, Modern 10K on Saturday. We had a lot of results. You can see the results yourself on mtgmelee.com, but we're going to break it down. And by we, I mean Dave. And by break it down, I mean explain it to Stanislav.
Exactly. Like he's a child. So Magic tournaments, Stan, they have people in them. This one had 194 players from what it looks like on MTG Melee. Not quite the 300 that I think they had capacity for, but 200 is a really good, solid turnout. We had a few predictions last episode going into this tournament. I think some of the big things were, we kind of thought the meta would be stable, mostly as far as frequency went. We felt like in comparison to the Paris tournament that we looked at last week, that Murktide would have a better week, have more of the metagame. We also thought that 4-color would reassert itself. And finally, we expected to see up arrows in decks, next to decks, with leyline binding in them, since these are some of the first tournaments that have happened since leyline binding has entered the meta. So let's talk about it. One thing, we're going to go through and talk about the win rates, meta percentage of all of the decks that are above 2% of the meta according to MTG Melee. We did not, unfortunately, clean the data this time, so we cannot reconcile anybody's bad deck names. I hope that people are behaving well, looking at all you jokers out there, but let's dive into it.
And look, if you're misbehaving, you're not getting covered in this episode of the podcast. Not sorry.
I'm not sorry at all. I will say that it's worth noting that on the MTG Melee page, there has been some reconciliation between the names that are in the kind of like full standings where they have all the deck names and what archetypes they're listed here, and I'll explain that a little bit as we go into it. But the place to start, I think, is top 5 decks. So let's go through the top 5 decks, quickly talk about their win rates, and then we can talk about things that were surprising outside of that top 5 of the meta. So the number 1 deck at this week's tournament in Minneapolis, was 4-color Blink. 9.8% of the metagame with a 54% win rate.
Okay. So we did think that it was going to do better than it did in Paris, and this tracks, right? Because in Paris, it was sub 50.
4-color was sub 50. Yes, so that is a better performance out of 4-color. The thing that was the most interesting thing to me about this is that I kind of feel like this is one of the first NRG in a while where the top deck was lower than 10% of the meta. I think we had a
just
few
barely.
where it was 14, 15%, and this is
just barely, though.
This is just barely. So it's essentially 10% of the meta. I do think that's still down from 14-ish% for some of the highs that we've had where there's been a lot of consolidation here.
Agreed. And perhaps part of that is more people picking up some of these more fringe is even the wrong word, slightly more up and coming, I think, is the better way to describe those decks that are potentially good against 4-color that we're going to start talking about in a second.
Exactly. But still top dog as far as the metagame goes, 4-color Blink is it. Usually, I would say most times, Is It Murktide is the number 1 deck by meta share, and it is number 2 this time with 8.2%. 16 pilots had Is It Murktide. But here's the kicker, though. Win rate of Murktide, 42%.
Ouch.
Yeah. Ouch, indeed. Pretty similar to what we saw with the Paris meta, where it was really pretty bad. Really bad. Yeah.
That's interesting. And I might start to revisit some of these win rates in an attempt to infer what happened after we go through the actual remaining 2% or above meta share, because I think we could start to tell a little story, piece together the puzzle of figuring out why is Murktide not doing so great. I have a theory, but I want to see if some of the data maybe supports it first.
Yeah, I definitely have a theory as well. 3rd place, Azorius Hammer. I believe that this covers Azorius and Mono White Hammer as far as the actual count goes. Taking a look through the results, I tried to see if they consolidated them. It looks to me like they did consolidate them into a single archetype. That was 7.77% of the metagame, 15 pilots, straight up a 50% win rate. Hammer decks went 49, 48, and 1 in the tournament. The next deck on the list, Golgari Yawgmoth, only had 11 pilots for 5.7% of the meta. Also counted as 50%. Those decks went 40, 36, and 4 right now. And then the final deck of the top 5, this was a little bit of a surprise to me as far as meta share goes. Amulet Titan. 5.1% or 10 pilots, 51.78% match win rate. So just above 50% there. So there's your top 5. What do you think, Stan?
Yawgmoth and Titan being in the top 5, I actually think is pretty impressive. Those are good popular decks.
Yeah.
Middling results perhaps, but I don't remember them ever being quite this popular in NRG or elsewhere. And this could be my own memory failing me, but I always feel like they're kind of lower in the top 10.
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, I think Yawgmoth's been knocking on the door of the top 5 for a while. Amulet getting higher is a bit of a surprise, and it makes me wonder if that was some people who are longtime Amulet pilots trying to take advantage of the fact that a lot of people are trying to cut on Blood Moon these days, or at least in theory, a lot of people are trying to cut on Blood Moon. I'm not sure if that's actually what's happening, to be honest. But the number one thing to me about these top 5 decks is that the win rate of this portion of the meta, if you look at it, it's basically 15%, 25%. It's between 35 and 40% of the meta between these 5 decks. The win rate of those decks is 54%, 42%, 50%, 50%, and 51%. So this 40-ish percent of the meta, 35, 40% of the meta, had an average win rate of the high 40s, low 50s, basically.
So with the exception of Murktide, doesn't that check out when a deck is more popular, but not necessarily overpowered? Where it's just with so many people in the room, inevitably half of them are going to start losing while the other half start winning. And
true.
I think over a big enough sample size, you find that average getting closer and closer to the middle.
Yeah, I mean, they do kind of converge towards the middle. These aren't controlled for mirror matches. That's right. So it's a thing that we could do if we wanted to go to the next level with it. But still, none of these individually stood out, and none of the decks in the top 5 managed to do that. And I think if you look at our results over time, there's usually a couple at this top that kind of peak up above 55% at least.
Yeah, and the other thing that occurs to me is because we're talking about a 200-person tournament, the top decks being in the number, in the magnitude of teens.
Yeah.
Like, we're still talking about pretty small numbers overall.
Yeah.
That, like, the difference between 11 Yawgmoth players, 10 Amulet players, and the next number 6 deck is Burn with 9 pilots. Like, it's so marginal that I think if maybe even 20 more people played in this tournament, we would probably have a slightly different top 5 too.
Yeah, potentially. But yeah, that was what was interesting to me about this top 5. I mean, none of these decks feel particularly like innovative to me right now. I think if you look at their list, the main thing that you might see is some Blink decks have picked up a couple of copies of Leyline Binding here and there, but not even all of them are doing that, honestly. So these are kind of old decks, mostly old cards, kind of here doing their thing, not a lot of impact from Dominaria. The thing that I thought we might look at next is kind of take a look at the rest of the meta and the decks that were above 55% win rate, and then the rest of the meta in a meta losers category, decks that were below 50% win rate. So kind of drawing a baseline there for these decks that were above 2% that had a better than 55% win rate. Pretty interesting ones here. They're small sample sizes because some of these are only had 4 pilots, so they would have a total of, for example, 30 matches, basically, in some cases. But the number one deck on this list to me, as far as win rate goes, is 5-color Creativity. 66% win rates at 3.5% of the meta. That was the highest one out of this greater than 2% sample. Shocked? Surprised? Interested?
Yeah, I am a little surprised, Dave, because my co-host keeps telling me how bad the deck is, even though results suggest otherwise, and people are winning tournaments with it.
It's like the moment that we had that episode where I tried out Creativity, from then it has been a slow and unceasing ascent from tier 2 minus deck to top table winner suddenly over the last 6 weeks or so.
Here's what I really think about Creativity. It's a combo control deck. It's not Splitter Twin, but it's like in the realm of like playing controlled cards, like playing really powerful planeswalkers that you can even afford to tap out for, and eventually like setting up a condition where you cast a spell that produces such a like untenable board presence. In this case, it's with Archon of Cruelties, but it's essentially this 1-card combo spell that I think in Modern's history, like we see cards and decks like that often have really powerful win rates, sometimes too powerful even. And though I'm not saying that that's the case with Creativity, I think as more people pick up this deck, get practice with it, understand some of the different ways you can build with it and like some of the different payoffs you're going for, whether it's Archon or otherwise, I think we're going to start to see this deck continue to prove itself as just like a format staple in today's metagame until a pretty significant shakeup, whether that's like powerful new cards are added or even, cards removed from the format, not necessarily from Creativity, but just in general, like something cataclysmic, I think would have to happen for Creativity to like suddenly be banned. Unless like Brothers War or some other upcoming standard set has a card that just like completely destroys Creativity that other decks can play in their sideboards.
Yeah. We're going to talk about specific lists later, but there's some interesting stuff with Creativity at this point. Although the biggest thing, honestly, is that it's fully embraced being 5-color, which, sometimes it was Teamer for a while there, and now the white splash is kind of coming back really strongly. Mostly because of one card, and that card is Leyline Binding. So I think that this is a deck that really benefits from Leyline Binding, and having a way to deal with any type of permanent for cheap is something that the Teamer versions of this deck sorely lacked. And so being able to have this and a better incentive to want to play Teferi Time Raveler, I think has really made it suddenly be something that has a lot more of a game on the ground, where before you had to kind of be a stat control counter, try to counter spells, remand kind of deck, and now you have the ability to deal with permanents when you didn't as much before.
Yeah, and I think that's part of like the combo control aspect of it. Leyline's Binding is a killer control card. Like you're only playing it reactively. And I think the stronger this gets as a control deck because of cards like that, the more I can sort of anticipate this deck working its way to the top, and we're just going to continue to see it appear in more top eights and winning more tournaments outright.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly has its weaknesses, right? But I think that in a field that's defined by 4-color blink at the top, this deck does a pretty good job against that particular matchup. And then there's a few other kind of decks at the top that it's good against as well. So 66% win rate for that. And actually, not to spoil it, but this tournament was won by Aaron Miller on 5-color creativity. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. We'll talk about Aaron's specific run more when we get to the top 8. So second deck on here, as far as win rate goes, so I'm going to go from the notes a little bit differently, Stan, is Teamer Scapeshift. We had 63% win rates, 2% in the meta. So 4 pilots brought Teamer Scapeshift, and it had a 63% win rate, which is pretty interesting as well. Not a deck a lot of people are thinking about. A lot of that was led by Rodney Bedell, who came in 17th in the Swiss. And yeah, I think this is the deck that you actually tried, right?
Indeed it is. And I will say when 4-color blink is the most popular deck in this room, Teamer Scapeshift is like here to feast.
Yeah, and creativity kind of too, right? So now we have a couple of decks that are having good win rates that are preying on the stuff that are at the top of the meta. Great. All right, next on the list, Jeskai Breach. So Jeskai Breach had 4 pilots as well, including Jesse Robkin, who was in 10th place, leaderboard, NRG leaderboard leader. And that deck had a 60% win rate across the 4 pilots. People who were doing that had 18, 9, and 3 record. A lot of ties. Jeskai Breach, a deck that I certainly could have considered picking up for this particular episode where you and I were talking about decks we've never got around to playing before. However, I think it might bear us doing a deeper investigation of sometime in the future. So maybe we kind of save that one for the future. But Breach is certainly on the up and up, and Jesse's long been an advocate of it. And then Ross Merriam has picked it up, and a few other notable people have also said that it's a really good deck. So I guess we shouldn't be too surprised that people are starting to pick it up a little bit in these tournaments. Still only 4 pilots, but on its way up. All right. Blue-White Control is next on that list. 60% win rate for Blue-White Control. There were 4 pilots on Blue-White Control. From the list that I've seen, they are Narset Days Undoing decks, which is
just across the board.
Wild. From what I can tell, yeah. I didn't look them all up individually right now.
Did that include the one that was in 3rd place?
Yes, the top 8 deck by George Devore was Narset's Days Undoing, and you know what else? It's really 5-color Blue-White Control because it has 4 Leyline Binding in the deck as well. And so they are running Triomes to be able to cast Leyline Binding for 1 as well. And this is when Everett was on a couple of weeks ago and was kind of like, hey, I think Leyline Binding is really good. And I said, well, how much do you think decks are going to start splashing Triomes just to be able to play Leyline Binding? This is the deck that I was thinking of that would really kind of, this type of deck. I was specifically thinking Blue-Eye Control, but people trying stuff like this is what I was specifically trying to hint with him, was kind of like, we're going to know it's a really absurd meta-defining card if people start playing Triomes literally only to be able to play this card, and they're not splashing other cards in this deck. They're just doing this.
The 60% win rate of Blue-White Control here is incredible because historically 4-color was a really problematic matchup. And part of why we started seeing Nassif, Wafo, Jabor, who's also like in that ilk of control masters, like turn to Days Undoing is to have this quasi combo that's just like does something really big to the game. Doesn't necessarily end the game on the spot, but it's a way to sort of reset the advantage bar in such a profound way. I don't know if that's the thing that turned around the 4-color matchup, if it's Leyline Binding, if it's the entire deck configuration because they're Cure decks, they're not playing Snapcaster, that kind of helps determine the type of elementals and interaction suite that they can turn to. But something has changed. And maybe that's also a change in the 4-color decks where their defenses are down to some of the tools in Blue-White Control. I don't know. I think this is something worth keeping an eye on moving forward. But to have such a positive win rate in a room that was full of 4-color suggests that these pilots had to have been beating 4-color decks along the way. And I think that's kind of like a big comeback in the metagame for blue-white, which was like kind of struggling for a while. You know, we haven't been talking about that deck in the top tiers for that long.
Yeah. And certainly this deck's overall performance was buoyed by George Jabour's performance. He went 7-1. You know, the next best pilot I saw on blue-white went 5-3, and then there's a 4-3-1, I think. So there's 3 decks that have winning records, which is great. With it, I didn't see where the fourth list was. I was just taking a look quickly. But you know, it's a small enough tournament that one person doing well can push these things up just a little bit as far as that goes. And then the last deck that I think is interesting, new, and has a small sample club up arrow next to it is Rakdos Midrange, or if you want to call it Scam, you can call it Scam, but for some reason, I just want to call it Rakdos Mid, which is what they call it here. That had a 59% win rate, and 6 pilots brought that. It was 3% of the meta. Certainly a deck that's been on the up and up on Magic Online. It went 12-15 or 25-15 and 2 in the Swiss, basically. Dan, what do you think about that deck?
I think we're going to talk about that deck some more, but seems good.
Seems good and fun. All right, let's talk about the meta losers.
Oh,
Below 50% win rate that were in this greater than 2% meta range. Sample number 1 on this list for me. Rhinos.
For you.
38. Well, it's the lowest percentage, unfortunately. 38% win rate for Rhinos. And actually, they list it on Melee as Teamer Rhinos. I couldn't actually find any Teamer Rhino deck lists. I only found 4-color ones. 4 and 5 color ones, and those were all kind of performing in a way that fit with a 38% win rate. So unfortunately, I think that it was just a rough weekend for Rhinos and kind of an average weekend for Living End, for what it's worth, which is also in the meta share, but it had a 53% win rate at with 5 pilots.
Yeah. I think with Yawgmoth getting more popular, the 5-color approach to Rhinos actually makes that matchup worse. Where Teamer used to prey on Yawgmoth, I don't think that matchup is so skewed anymore. And as a result, potentially like the Rhino players are just losing some free wins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. By giving up on, you know, in your mind, it's by giving up on
Stomp, Petty Theft, Dead Gone here or there. It's just like Fury, Leyline Binding, Fire Ice, and like maybe a couple of Dead Gone. Like, I just don't think it's enough.
There you go. Burn had a 43% win rate, and like Stan said, it was the 6th most popular deck. So there was 9 pilots on it. They went 23, 30, and 0. No surprise that there were no draws with Burn. And then finally, Grixis Death Shadow had 4 pilots, and it was 45% win rate, also a sub 50% kind of rate. That stood out to me.
So I think Grixis Shadow mirroring Murktide results actually kind of feels right, just because Murktide and Shadow are more similar than they are different. And if the most popular decks in the room are 4-color Azorius Hammer, like I don't think Thoughtseize is doing that much for you, which is kind of like the main advantage to Death Shadow over just Murktide, right? Just like access to Thoughtseize and a 1-mana Tarmogoyf. A 1-mana vanilla Murktide?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's Delver, kind of. Like, that's what most people think. It's a cheap threat backed up by a counterspell. That's sort of what Murktide's trying to do, too, of course. It's just, you know, hand disruption, like you said. I will say, I saw a really spicy list over the weekend on Twitter, and I forget the name of the pilot. I'm sorry if you happen to be a listener. Someone won an RCQ with Dimir Shadow and said that they were a big believer in this archetype as the place where both Murktide and Shadow should go, and it's definitely kind of like on my radar for something I'd like to come back to and try over the next couple of weeks. It was basically a Shadow deck with Murktide in it and Ledger Shredder, which was pretty cool. But let's talk about the top 8. So the top 8 was Aaron Miller, as I mentioned, on 5-color creativity. Aaron went undefeated in the Swiss, and since Aaron also won, it's worth noting that Aaron went undefeated in the whole tournament. He was 10-0-1, probably, I think, is what the end was. You know, like we said, it has Leyline Binding right now, but there's a couple other interesting things in this deck as well, which is kind of how the deck picks up alternate ways to get Archon into play, right? So we've seen a number of creativity decks recently that have Transmogrify as a 1 of or a 2 of as like a backup creativity. something that's happened recently is people upping the cards that put cards in their graveyard, like like Fable of the Mirror Breaker or occasionally Shadow Prophecy, though Aaron's deck didn't have Shadow Prophecy from Dominaria in it, and playing some number of persists, like a traditional Reanimator strategy, blending in with creativity as a way to kind of pull that one Archon that got into your graveyard back out for cheap. Pretty interesting, and it seems to be something that's starting to be persistent. There's no Emrakul in the sideboard of Aaron's deck, which is also interesting. So there's really not a plan B here for a different threat with creativity. You're basically just going for Archon, or that's it. And the other thing I noticed is that there's a few people who are starting to pick up playing, and Aaron was one of them, and also George DeBoer was one of them in the sideboard, playing Hallowed Moonlight. Do you remember the card Hallowed Moonlight?
It's a white card.
It is a white card, and what it says is it's from Origins, and it is a card that says
I can see the art.
Yeah, it costs a generic and a white, text. And it says until end of turn, if a creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, exile it instead, draw a card. And this has to be, because it doesn't work on, the only things that I'm thinking of here that this works against right now are, for one thing, it would work against goblins, right? Because those are tokens.
Oh my God, it basically works against the whole field.
Well, it works against Archons coming in off of creativity. What else does it work? It doesn't work against Evoke Elementals, though, because Evoke is an alternate casting cost. It's not that those creatures are cast, right?
Right, but if you're feign deathing them.
Oh, right. Yes. They leave and come back. Yeah, so it's an anti-scam card too. Yep. Okay.
It's good against persist creatures.
Right.
Okay. I think those are the big ones. It's probably even good against shark tokens.
Oh, true. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just randomly.
So it would be interesting if after all these years, that's a card that's been out for 7 years or so. Originally, people assumed that it was anti-Splinter Twin tech, essentially. But yeah, it would be fascinating if this card suddenly became actually playable, a playable modern Magic card at this point in time. We'll see if it really is. Second place, or second seed, actually not second place, second seed coming out of the Swiss was Nathaniel Perigo on Blue-White Affinity. I think we're pretty familiar with this deck at this point. It sees occasional heavy results. This is, a person who top 8'd with it, and this is your modern version of 8 casts, essentially, although this deck actually has 7 casts. But it is what it is. It's blue-white. It's your Urza plus Urza Saga list, and you can kind of imagine what that looks like from there.
Do you happen to have the 8 cast win rate handy? I'm guessing there must have only been 3 or fewer players because it's not in our 2% and above.
I can pull it up. Give me 1 second.
Which means Nathaniel was, if not the only, just one of the only players. We had talked about Murktide being the second most popular deck in the room. Grixis Shadow is also top 10 among popularity. These 8-cast decks are great against Murktide, Delver style strategies, period. So if Nathaniel's matchup spread was fortunate, they have Affinity has other great matchups, don't get me wrong, but if this player is facing Murktide more than once in the tournament, I think that's actually going to help them a lot on their path to top 8.
Yeah, from what I can see, this looks like it might have been the only one. I would be surprised, but it's not actually there. There is a win rate for Mono Blue Affinity listed here, and that says it's 3 pilots at 43% win rate, but this could be one where the deck name doesn't quite line up with reality.
Yeah, in any case, this almost seems like it was just a great meta call for the room. If you're expecting a ton of Murktide and the 8-cast players know what their other good matchups are, and I just don't, but this could be one of those decks similar to Scapeshift where you can just register for the right tournament if you know what's going to be popular and kind of just prey on a metagame.
Totally agree. All right, third seed was George DeBoer on Blue-White Control, which we talked about. This is a Narset Days Undoing deck. It's also running Teferi, of course, Teferi Time Raveler. It's got a couple of Jaces, Solitude, Subtlety. It's kind of what you would expect Blue-White Control to look like these days. A lot of lands. The thing that this still really points out to me is that maybe triumphs were a mistake, but we could talk about some other time.
No, there's no maybe about it. They absolutely were, but this is the world we have to live in now.
It's over now. There's no going back.
Yeah, I will say I actually follow George on Twitch. Really nice guy, really good player, worth a follow. Jabber plays a lot of Control, and like you can learn a lot about the ever changing landscape of blue-white decks from watching George grind Modern Leagues.
Yeah. Awesome. Fourth seed was Scott Polera. Scott Polera is one of the people at the top of the NRG Season 2 leaderboards. We haven't talked about him too much because he's been sort of lurking outside of the top 5. Also, Scott has been hanging out a lot in the Dive Down Discord lately. You know, Jesse is there quite frequently, and Scott being there too is pretty cool to kind of pick his brain about the way tournaments have gone. You know, it's awesome to see him get some more points. He was on Living End, one of the few people at the top of the rankings on Living End this weekend. Nothing too innovative about that particular list. Same thing with fifth seed. Fifth seed was Samuel Nordenson on Yawgmoth. I don't think there was too much different about this particular list. I mean, certainly configured for the way that they thought this tournament would go. You know, there was only a single endurance, a couple of other notable things like that, but nothing too big or surprising about this particular list. 6th and 7th place, I think, is interesting and something that we might want to talk about for a minute. We already did talk about Scam for a minute, but in 6th seed and 7th seed were Blake Madsen and Jonathan Perigo on Rakdos Scam. While this top 8 had 2 Perigos, Nathaniel in 2nd seed and Jonathan in 7th seed. Whoa.
I wonder if they know each other.
I wonder. There might be East Coast and West Coast Perigos, though, so they famously don't get along. You know, this deck we've been talking about a lot lately. It's cool, right? Like, it's starting to feel like it's powerful. It's nice to see a home for, like I kind of said last week, for Blood Crypts to start existing in Modern again, other than Grixis Death Shadow. And
yeah,
so
Blackleaf Cliff too.
Yeah.
It's nice to get like some red-black fast mana out there.
Actually, that's the big one, is that Blackleaf Cliff has not had a home for like a real home for like a year. And so this is cool to see. But if you haven't played this deck, you know, you pitch your elementals, you play a card like Undying Malice or something like that to kind of to play the evoke cost. It behaves like Ephemerate. It brings it back from your graveyard, comes back in, you get another comes into play trigger. And then in the case of Fury, you also have a giant double striking threat on turn 1 potentially. In the case of Grief, you may have just taken 2 cards away from your opponent. Outside of that, these decks kind of play out like you would expect a mid-range deck to play out these days. They do run Ragavan. Their 2-drops also generally have Dalthy Voidwalker in them. So it's a pretty cool, kind of harkens back to the first list that Aspiring Spike was playing around with a little bit, except for instead of going in hard on Luris, they're now going in hard on abusing evoke elementals. Only difference between this 6th and 7th place list, really, that I could tell substantially is that Madsen was running 2 Kroxa and 1 Liliana of the Veil, whereas Jonathan Perigo was running Fable of the Mirrorbreaker main, which is pretty interesting to see in a deck that's really just playing it for value and not trying to take a huge advantage of the discard part of it necessarily. So either way, this is a cool deck, and actually the other finalist, along with Aaron Miller, was Blake Madsen, who ended up losing to Aaron in the finals. And then finally, the 8th seed was Joe Bernal, well-known Chicago grinder, Control player. Joe was on 4-color Blink with Yorion. This is the Traverse version. Do we still think that we need to take some power out of Yorion at this point, or do we think the meta actually managed to solve itself a bit? What do you think?
It's tough. Most popular deck in the room. It still had a win rate north of 50.
It's still super annoying.
Games take forever. Like, look at how many draws we've talked about over the course of this tournament report. I have a feeling decks like this are partially responsible for that.
You're responsible for all the draws.
I still think that maybe not in a like Hogak Tybalt's trickery kind of way, to answer your question. Like, that's not the type of metagame we're in where there's like this stupid problem card that shouldn't exist. I think there's something broken about what type of resources are available to Modern players. And the Yorion decks are emblematic of that. And they're not the only ones who get to benefit from this, like creativity does too. And I think I've been very careful to say, like, I'm not saying like creativity is too strong or like something needs to be done with this deck, but just like these like Ren and 6 soupy decks that like play control, tons of free spells, and just like weirdly will like generate like an insane amount of mana advantage on turn 5 or 6 out of nowhere sometimes. Like something is amiss there.
Yeah.
And I think the format could be made more fair, whether it's Yorion or Ren and 6 or Omnath or Teferi or Triomes. Like there's something that in my opinion is a little too pushed for the format that makes it harder to like engage in a 1-to-1 game for very long. But thanks for putting me on the spot, Dave.
I mean, I have complicated feelings about it now. I certainly was kind of like, we got to get rid of Yorion at one point in time recently. I kind of feel just sort of design philosophy still opposed to companions generally at this point, though I did enjoy playing with them for as long as they were legal in different places. I still in my heart kind of feel like that card just needs to go and we should see what happens to the meta, but
I liked them more when you didn't have to pay 3.
Well, sure, we all
did. You
know
what I mean? Like, I almost feel like more of them were playable, and it was like the rules changed that kind of made it a Lurrus versus Yorion game,
right?
At least from my perspective,
it already was. It was just like more of them were kind of playable, I guess. I don't know.
Yes,
I'm just not a fan of that at this point. I mean, it's been
I don't
2.5 years.
Yeah, no.
It's time to move on.
I kind of think, just if I'm going to make bold predictions that maybe one day I can point to call out how smart I am.
Yeah, we forget the ones that don't come true, Stan. Give us your call.
Every year something happens to Modern in like January or February, almost like clockwork.
Yeah.
Lurrus was banned in February. The previous January was, January of the previous year is when Cascade and Uro was dealt with. I can sort of see like Yorion, Ren and 6, and maybe something else going in Q1 of next year. Like, would we be surprised?
No, we wouldn't.
Unless something like wildly changes in the format. Like, I kind of feel like those two cards and maybe even like Expressive Iteration, maybe. But if you look at the Delver win rates this year, like Expressive Iteration doesn't seem like the problem, but the soupy decks are playing that too. So it's like Yorion, Ren and 6, Expressive Iteration, get out of here. Like, I can see the format maybe getting a little bit less, I don't even know the word to describe it, annoying.
I think it's still pretty fun. I don't grind these tournaments though, so
lots of annoying things are fun.
Right.
Rick and Morty?
Sure.
Rick and Morty fans?
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Rick and Morty fans, we know you're out there on listening to our podcast. We love you.
Listen, I've seen every episode, so calling the kettle black here.
Great. Like we said, the tournament was won by Aaron Miller on creativity versus Blake Madsen on scam. Somehow now what do you think we said last week about these two decks? Did we say that we were like, oh yeah, the finals are going to be these two decks? Did we say that we were hoping to see high-end finishes from these two? That's what I felt like I said, was that these are the two decks I said I wanted to see do well.
I think it's amazing how little I can retain a week later.
We're also not going to go check the tapes, just to be clear, everybody. We're not going to take the time.
No. Yeah. Someone from our Discord is, of course. Yes. I'm sure, and we'll post the timestamp as they're known to do. I think we said that this tournament is going to be won by one of those two, and I think we, of Scam particularly, said like in this tournament, like Scam is the deck to watch out for.
Yeah.
Because it's like poised for a big paper finish.
Yep. And I think it was. It just turned out it didn't quite have the win rate that that creativity did in particular, and some of the other up-and-coming decks do. I will say
nor the representation.
Yes, exactly. Well, it had just a little bit less representation than creativity. Most of these decks that have up arrows next to them or good win rates are all kind of in that 2 to 3% of the metagame. I will say that list of decks that were small in the metagame with big win rates from roguish decks that we know are kind of well established. Again, that list was creativity, Rakdos Mid, Jeskai Breach, Teamer Scapeshift, and Blue Eye Control. If all of those decks happen to be reasonably things to bring to a Magic tournament again, that would be pretty cool. These are 5 decks that we haven't been talking about a huge amount lately. Certainly Creativity and Scam have been talked about. Breach has been in different capacities, but these are all decks that if they really were to break into common occurrence, it would shake up the metagame in Modern quite a bit. So that was kind of exciting to see all those decks here potentially making an impression.
Yeah, all I'll say is like I'm doing that thing where I'm just like counting up how much would it cost me to build Scam, and it's maybe $20.
Yes. Well, I built it. So for what it's worth, Stan and I played some Modern the other night at my house, and I was sleeving up a deck beforehand, and I realized that I had everything for Scam already ready. And so when he showed up, I was like, guess what deck I'm playing? Turn 1 Blackleaf Cliffs, and he was like, what? But
yeah, I like how Jonathan Perigo's deck, like 4 Terminate in Modern.
4 Terminate, yeah.
And I've got those full art Terminates from like player rewards or whatever.
Whoa.
That alone I feel like is worth putting in like $20 for some Malakir Rebirths, Feign Deaths, and a Hidetsugu consumes all on the sideboard. You probably don't even need the Hidetsugu.
I tell you what, I can let you borrow a Hidetsugu if you'd like to. I have 4 of them. I'm never going to need 4 of them. Also,
just let me have one.
I just noticed that Jonathan has an Obnixilis in it in the sideboard too. Check it out.
Well, I mean, no deck is perfect.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can find something better to put in that place. Liliana the Veil.
All right, let's quickly talk about Pioneer.
Although, hold on. Wait a second. Obnixilis, Casualty plus Feign Death. That's a combo, isn't it?
Yes.
Broke it.
Yeah.
Broke it. Put that Ob main deck.
Yeah, exactly. We've moved it.
Why is it a 1-up in the side?
All right. Are you up for talking about Pioneer for a second before we get on to our stuff?
Of course.
All right. The Sunday event here was a Pioneer 5K. Gonna just go through the metagame really quickly. We were able to use a Twitter metagame provided by someone named Joe Kleckner. That's at JE Kleckner on Twitter, who tagged Fire Shoots for Value. And of course, when you tag Fire Shoots for Value in your breakdown, it goes out to everybody on Twitter all the time. So let's talk about the interesting thing going on with the metagame in Pioneer. There's one insight that Joe kind of pointed out that I'd love to talk about. So the overall metagame of this tournament was Mono Green Devotion. 18.2% of the metagame was Mono Green Devotion, followed by Rakdos Mid at 14.5%, Greasefang at 10.9%. I think that Abzan Greasefang is the popular one now, if I'm remembering right, but we'll see kind of where things go. Mono White Humans at 9.1%, Blue White Control at 6.4%, Mono Red at 4.5%. And just to be arbitrary, I'm going to stop at this next 4.5% with Is It Phoenix? Why not? There was also Esper Control and Elves at 4.5%. That's more than 75% of the meta right there between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 decks. But 4 decks made up the top 50% of the meta. 2 decks in this meta are more than the other category, which for me is my arbitrary place where I start having bells about Modern anyway, but I don't think Pioneer's able to be as diverse as Modern at this point in time, maybe sometime in the future. But, so, what do you think about these as being the top 5 decks, let's say, Stan, 5, 6 decks? Kind of just looks like Pioneer, right?
Yeah, Greasefang being that popular in paper, I think is actually a little bit surprising. I don't think we've ever seen it be quite this popular, but maybe after Dominaria, it got new tools that I just haven't been keeping up with to call out. I guess what I'm saying, like, this seems like a pretty big drop for Is It Phoenix and Blue White Control, just on the popularity scale. Mono U, like, I've not been keeping up with this format enough to say when Mono U Spirits dropped off, but like, it is just down there.
Yeah, Blue has been on the downswing for a while now, unfortunately, much to my chagrin. But
yeah, I mean, like, to me, Pioneer is just kind of like a glorified standard format. Like, it's going to be Mono Green versus Rakdos for a while, but like, I think things like Greasefang, Humans, Blue White Control is probably the third one in that like top trifecta, in my opinion. But like Greasefang, Humans, Mono Red, Phoenix, and other stuff, Spirits for Idols, for instance, like I can kind of see this maybe trying to nip at the heels of the top 3 decks.
Yep. So for what it's worth, Abzan Greasefang was 3rd seed going into the top 8, piloted by Matthew Ruck. Maybe we'll read through the top 8 really quickly once we get through this meta breakdown. But what's interesting about Obzon Greasefang is that it is completely kind of stock as far as it goes. There's not any new Dominaria cards in here. There is like 2 Rotting Regisaur, which is a wild thing. I didn't even know that made it into Greasefang. But yeah, it doesn't seem to be too much new stuff in here. It just seems to be that maybe the grind of Satyr Wayfinder and into Can't Stay Away is something that people want to really kind of do as much as they can. All right, so that was the top. The thing that was really interesting that Joe pointed out in his Twitter thread is that the conversion rates into the top 32 of those decks are actually pretty different. And so the deck that converted into top 32 the most was Rakdos Mid. So Rakdos Mid was 21.9% of the top 32, which means 7 out of 32. Oh my God, 6 out of 32. Let me get a calculator out. But at any rate, that's pretty interesting. The next deck to convert the most was Mono White Humans, which is a deck that has been getting more and more popular as time has gone on. In Pioneer, it seems to be the premier aggro deck basically in the format right now. There's a couple of other decks that are on their way up, but Humans is where it's at. And the Mono Green Devotion was only 12.5% of the top 32. So it was down from 18.2% of the overall meta to 12.5%. Greasefang also was 12.5% of the top 32. So that actually converted at a slightly higher rate than it was in the Swiss. So I think the big thing here to think about is that Devotion did not deliver kind of on being the top deck in the format in the same way that Rakdos managed to, and even that Humans managed to, really.
I wonder if part of that has to do with the fact that like Rakdos is just this mid-range attrition deck. Devotion is this rampy combo beatdown deck, and one of them is easier to hate on, plan for, and beat up on.
Could be. It's tough for me to know. Pioneer is like a format that I enjoy playing when I do, and we pay kind of like one eyeball worth of attention on it. But I've realized today, especially when I was trying to play Mono Green Devotion, that I really don't have a great handle on like the sideboard tech in certain matchups and what's really effective and why you would configure your decks a certain way in the format in the way that I do in a much more passable but equally amateurish way in Modern. Why don't we quickly go through the top 8, just because I thought that the top 8 was pretty cool. Number 1 rank going into the top 8 with a 6-1 record actually was Jesse Robkin on Mono White Humans. Number 2.
Oh, hey, Jesse.
Yeah, exactly. Jesse, another big weekend. First in this tournament in the Swiss, 10th in the Modern. 1, Vox Howland.
Good at Magic.
Yeah, exactly. Well established, good at Magic. Number 2 going into the top 8 was Vox Howland on Is It Phoenix, followed by Matthew Ruck on Obzon Greasefang, Will Kowalczyk on Rakdos Token. So this is more of your sacrifice kind of deck, I'm assuming, looking at the list right here.
No, this is just mid-range.
This is
mislabeled mid-range deck.
Yeah. Don't know why it's called tokens. Then Rakdos mid-range was after that as well. Number 5, Eric Hennig. This is definitely a mid-range version of the deck. Number 6, a deck that you might love, Stan, Golgari Elves. 6th place. What do you think about this list compared to the stuff that you tried last week on our Lords episode?
I'm reading over this deck list now. A lot of Jasperis Sentinel in here. Seems pretty okay. A lot of Shaper Sanctuary postboard. Seems really important against the Rakdos decks in particular.
Yeah.
Even like this one of Lair the Hydra is interesting as just a late game plan B if you're losing to Wraths. I mean, look, it's a good aggro deck. This person was fast enough of the times to make top 8. It's not, I think, the evidence we need to say, like, I need to revisit this deck to change my opinion of it.
Yeah. Was the deck that you were playing, did it have Nykthos in it too? I didn't remember you talking about that last week.
Yeah, I played 3 Nykthos, yes.
Yeah. I mean, there's no reason not to, right? Here, so totally makes sense.
There is a couple reasons not to, and that's because, like, a lot of your cards are just a single green pip. Not all, Elvish Clan Caller, Steel Leaf Champion. Those are and Circle of Dreams Druid, like those are like really good with Nykthos on the board. But I don't know, like you're only playing 19 lands and you're playing 8 mana dorks. So like sometimes you get in this awkward position where you find yourself with Elvish Mystic and a Nykthos and nothing else, and you have to ship it back. So that really stinks, of course. In other cases, like especially post board, you know when you can keep a one lander with a mana dork because the likelihood of it eating a fatal push or a shock or something goes down. Like against mono green, for instance, like I'm not particularly worried about my mana dorks dying quickly. So like Nykthos is so good that I guess you have to, but like sometimes you find yourself in this really awkward position where it's not even like making that much mana and it's only making green mana that you can't spend on a shaman or some of your sideboard cards. So look, proud of Ricky. Deck looks sweet. I don't think it's necessarily great though, but good players can do well with, average to above average decks.
Yeah. 7th seed going into the top 8. George Jabeur, again, on Azorius Control in Pioneer. Did it.
How do these people have the mental energy? That Jesse, George, others, like, when I'm done with, like, a 6-round competitive REL tournament, like, my brain is fried. I'm in a rotten mood the next day. I feel like I just took the SATs. And I never took the SATs.
You never took
ACT,
the SATs? Man. Oh, ACT. Gotcha.
Yeah. And it's just like to get back-to-back top 8s or like back-to-back top 16s even, just like so impressive to me.
They're just locked in right now,
They're locked in. Not me. I'm locked out. I lost my keys on the drive over.
Last one, Larry Fields. Larry Fields has popped up in a lot of these NRG tournaments as well. Mono Blue Spirits in 8th place. So there you go.
The addition of combat research in Mono Blue Spirits, I've heard people talking about this as like just another good curious obsession. I mean, it's basically curiosity that stipulates combat damage, which is irrelevant. It does have this extra line of text. As long as enchanted creature is legendary, it gets +1/+1 and has ward 1. This doesn't have any legendary creatures though, so I guess that's just flavor text.
Yeah, exactly. I'm kind of surprised to see that card in here. Is Curiosity
it's just
not legal in Pioneer? I thought for sure Curiosity would be, but
I guess not. But what's also interesting, like you're not playing Mana Beak. You're only playing Gaslight Snare and Slip Out the Back.
Yeah,
and a Spell Pierce. So if anything, it just makes your Gaslight Snares that much better.
Yeah, there's been a number of decks that over the last few months that had kind of gotten rid of the Mana Leak kind of versions and we're just playing, the one. Just Gaslight Snare. Anyway, Pioneer still looking interesting. The last thing I would say is the same Twitter thread from Joe Kleckner he actually went through and tabulated the win rates for all the decks as well. One thing that's really interesting is Rakdos Mid's win rate was 57% overall. Mono Blue Spirit's win rate was 62%. Is It Phoenix was 62%, Bant Humans was 64%, and Enigmatic Incarnation, there was one person on Enigmatic Incarnation, and their win rate was 71.43%. They went 5-2, so they had a 70% win rate. Bam. But some of these ones that were bigger sample sizes, like Rakdos being almost 60 with 60 people. Mono White Humans was 55% with 10 pilots. Pretty interesting to see those two kind of like emerging at the top. Mono Green Devotion, 46% win rate with 20 pilots.
Yeah, but like, look at Elves down here. Elves, 43%. Like, that feels right to me. Band Spirits, really struggling. Greasefang, only 52%. And I had mentioned when we were talking about the meta share that like, Greasefang being, the third most popular deck was surprising to me just because like we haven't seen it performing that highly in paper especially. And the data seems to support kind of my hunch. I will say like Mono Blue Spirits, 62%. Like I think I wrote it off a little too early there. Like it still has a room to kind of prey on a little bit, especially if Mono Green is the most popular deck in the room.
Yeah. I mean, it's still one of my favorite decks to play in this format, but not as much favorite as Rakdos Mid is. So That's kind of still where I am, although it's getting to be kind of just annoying to everybody. I think that what's essentially Jund is so good in this format. But anyway, Pioneer looking good, and we'll probably increase our focus on Pioneer a little bit closer as we get closer to DreamHack, since RCQ season is coming to an end, and we're planning to go down there, cover the tournament, have some fun, all that kind of stuff.
Before we wrap up this NRG weekend of a section, you want to talk a little bit about just like next steps from here? Like, what do we think is the play for people engaging either formats? What do we as players maybe want to take from this? Is there anything that we as podcasters want to take from this about like what we want to look at on the show? I kind of feel like we need someone in addition to Dave to play creativity. I would love to get like some more minds on it, challenge each other's experiences and expectations, try to get a little closer to the truth about why this deck has been doing so well in general, and what are some of the best ways to play and pilot it.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to, I've acknowledged that I've had problems getting that deck to work, and so I would love an episode where all of us play it at some point in the future. That would be great. I'd love to try to get a friend onto the podcast with us to help us with that episode. Maybe if we could get Zach Ryle on at some point, to talk about it, that would be really cool. If you're out there, Zach. I also would love to do a dive down into Scam. We've talked about it a number of times, and I think now might be the time to do it. I mean, for me, I just am excited in Modern that there are these new-ish decks that are kind of emerging after a bit of a lull, right? Which I think is cool. And, they're not all decks that I might play. Jeskai Breach is a deck that I certainly could have tried for this episode on decks that we've never played before. And that could have been a fun thing to hear me Keystone Cop my way through a league with Breach. But that's kind of where I'm at. I think in Pioneer, as we start thinking more and more about the next couple of months, or DreamHack in particular, I think that we'll just keep an eye on what Rakdos is doing and if any other decks emerge to kind of fight Rakdos at this point. But with the addition of Shieldred and some other stuff, like that deck is just looking stronger every day. I'll also be curious to see if Mono Green comes back, but we can talk a little bit more about Mono Green in my section. What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I want to try Creativity a spin. I've never actually played it in Modern. I used to play it a ton in like arena formats.
Yep.
Never in Pioneer, but I think I played in both Historic and Explorer, but I haven't turned on Arena in what feels like months now, so that must have been a long time ago. And it being a Ren and 6 deck, I think is really interesting to me. Like, Arceus Dota tweeted something over the weekend. For those who don't recall, Arceus Dota is like a very good Rhino player. Recently won a big tournament over there on Rhinos, like as soon as Leyland Binding became paper legal, basically. And he had tweeted something to the tune of, you pretty much have to play Ren and 6 right now to be competitive in Modern, and maybe just like exploring some decks, especially Creativity, through that lens of like, is Ren and 6 the or one of the most important cards in the format? I think could be a pretty cool lens and analysis. Scam is hot.
Yeah,
Scam is so hot right now.
Yeah,
we can't dive into it without Shane. We need Shane. We can play Creativity without Shane. We cannot play Scam without Shane.
I think Shane would almost think it was a kindness we did him if we played a deck like Creativity without him. So maybe that's what we should do next week, Stan, is just talk about Creativity. All right, get at us in the comments if you want us to talk about Creativity next week, for real. Yeah, I mean, one thing that was interesting is that we played, when you were over at my house over the weekend, we played some matchups, and the two decks I had were 5-color Creativity and Scam, like I mentioned. And the Scam versus Murktide matchup was pretty interesting, actually, to kind of like work your way through. Felt like it was pretty even in a lot of ways, and kind of fun interactive Magic. Before we go, we're going to check into the NRG leaderboard really quickly. I think the biggest news about what happened about the Season 2 leaderboard is that Jesse Robkin locked up an invite to the championship event, guaranteeing at this point that she'll be one of the top 2 people in points when this season comes to an end. She came in 10th in the Modern event, like we said, on Breach, and then played into the top 4 of Pioneer. So after Saturday, she had 85 points, and that's when NRG reached out and said, okay, qualified for the championship event. Then she went on to top 4, the Pioneer event as well. And I think the unofficial total right now is 100 points for Season 2. So, You're in. Congratulations. That's awesome to see. Another big mover is Scott Polera with his top 8. You know, we mentioned that he has been lurking around kind of just outside the top 5. He's now in 4th place in the season 2 leaderboard with 63 points. I think that given that the 2 people in between them, which is Max Kamenowski and Connor Mullally, are in between Jesse and Scott on the leaderboard, I think that means that right now, if the season was to stop, Scott would get the second at-large qualification, but we want to check with Norm about that. That's just how I think that the invites move down. And then Joe Barnell went from 20th place to 9th place on the leaderboard, but Joe is already queued because he was the champion last year in NRG, so he already has a queue into the championship event from there. Most of the rest of the board had similar ranks, smaller moves, people kind of staying right around where they were. And so, it's cool to see a couple of big moves, but the rest of the kind of field is sort of consolidating around the people who are really having success over the last couple of weeks. Next NRG event is October 22nd. In Newark, Ohio. Stan, do you want to drive to Newark, Ohio with me? What do you think?
Have you been to Newark, Ohio?
Yes. It's just outside of Columbus.
Is it like the Mundelein of Ohio?
I think
that all of Ohio is the Mundelein of the Midwest?
Easy. Don't talk about my homeland like that. My Guardians are going to the playoffs. It's about 30 miles outside of Columbus. It is a trip from Chicago. I'll tell you, it's like 7 hours to drive to Columbus from Chicago. So it's farther than it seems to the middle of Ohio there. But the main event is Teams Pioneer Modern Legacy 10K on Saturday. It's a team event. And then the Sunday event is a Modern 5K.
Is there no way to fly? Can't we fly into a city and drive for a few minutes?
To Columbus. Yeah, we could. But we're saving, come on, you and me are saving up all our points to be able to go to DreamHack, unfortunately. And there is another event.
I don't have points.
There is another event in Chicago coming up as well for NRG, and I imagine that's one that we'll be trying to go to as well.
Yes, that's either November, December.
It's the weekend after Thanksgiving. It's like November 26th.
Oh, right. Yeah, right. It's actually the Sunday of Thanksgiving weekend, Saturday, Sunday of Thanksgiving weekend, if I recall. And that's back in Mundelein, Modern main event. I'm all but guaranteed to be there. I've actually already told my family I'm going to be there. And they're like, whatever, we're going to be eating turkey. So leave us alone.
Yeah.
More turkey for us.
Yep, exactly. All right. Well, this is fun. It was a long breakdown, like we said. NRG is a great series. Like we said many times, we think they're saving paper magic. We hope you can be a part of it if you are close to the tournament. Right now, we're going to take a break, though, hop over to some of the stuff that Stan and I have been doing lately, so please stay with us.
All right, so this is going to be a first for Dive Down content. We're going to do an unboxing. I recently received a package from our friends over at Barrister & Mann. Hold on, let me smell this cardboard. The cardboard smells good. Now, David, can you attest, this box is completely sealed?
It is. We have no idea what's in Stan's box. I couldn't wait. I opened my box, but we'll talk about that depending on what's in Stan's.
So I grabbed my Swiss Army knife. Let's cut this open. Oh yeah. I've always been curious about the unboxing genre because I've heard that that's how you can be a millionaire. It's just opening boxes on camera. But maybe I would settle for just a couple thou for opening boxes on mic.
There you go. I mean, that's what we're working towards, really.
This is taped on multiple sides, so I have to cut open the sides as well. Okay. As soon as I open it, it's just all these fragrances and aromas, they enter the nostrils as soon as it hits your lips.
All at once.
All right, here I got Muirwood soap.
Hey,
you got the Muirwood?
I got Muirwood soap too. One of the new fragrances from Barrister & Mann.
It's earthy, piney. It kind of smells like the woods, but on a dewy autumn day, kind of like Walden Pond. This is going to make you smell like Thoreau, if Thoreau bathed.
Or, John.
Did he bathe?
John Muir, who it's named after as well, who is one of the initial environmental advocates in America, led to the founding of the Sierra Club. Don't think he was literally the founder of the Sierra Club, but there is a very famous redwood area called Muir Woods. Hey, check it out.
All right, I got another soap.
Leviathan? Yep.
How would you describe this one?
So I'm going to open mine right now to get full access to the scent. This one is a bit more kind of floral to me and a little bit kind of smoky in a way.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's smoky, almost like a fire pit, like burning logs in your yard.
Yep. Kind of herbal.
That's nice.
That's definitely a scent
It's a
I
musk.
Like. Yeah.
You know, like this has some musk vibes.
Yeah.
That smells nice. So here's a couple interesting additions. We've heard about these. We've talked about these. We got samples here.
That's right.
Shaving soap samples. And you know, if you've never used a shaving soap, the difference between a shaving soap and a shaving cream is shaving soap is this solid. You have to get it wet, and then usually you will use like a brush to brush your face to get your face all lathered up, and then you shave it off. And, you know, once your face is lathered, it essentially looks the same as like putting shaving cream on your body. This is like a little bar of soap.
Yep. It's a 1 ounce sample of some of their shaving soap. So if you want to try it, you can get a sample on their website right now of Murray Wood, Leviathan, or Cologne Russe for $6. It's for 1 ounce of the soap. If you want to test it out, and it comes in a nice little package, and then you can try out all these great new scents that we have. So it looks like Stan and I got the same packages, which is great. And by the way, again, I'm a huge fan of the bar soap. I use the bar soap all the time. I know it's not the shaving soap. Stan and Shane do the shaving. I just do the bathing over here. But I do love the beard oil and the hand and body soap, and it is great.
Yeah, I do both. I have one last thing here. So I got the Leviathan and the Muirwood shaving soap samples. Excited to try these. I'm guessing you don't need a brush with the samples. You can just kind of lather it up, get your hands all lathered and rub it on your face, or just rub the bar on your face or any part of your body that you're shaving.
Yep.
I also got some candies. Did you get candy?
Yes, I did. And let me tell you, I already ate both of them. They're these nice coffee candies that Will threw into the package, and they're great, delightful.
All right, so the last step of this unboxing is a taste test. Latte candy. We've never eaten on mic before, but Shane's not here, so
he can't stop us. He also can't stop us from talking about Barrister and Man for what I think is like 7 minutes.
Listen, it's worth it.
It is. I got to tell you, Leviathan is great. Check out these new fragrances. Like we talked about last week, they also now offer refills. So if you want to make sure that you can reuse your shaving soap container without having to get a whole new plastic thing, you can go ahead and talk to them about getting that. And then keep an eye on new scents. The Four Horsemen that we talked about last week is coming back, coming out soon. Go check it out, barristerandman.com, where if you use the code TheDiveDown15, you'll get 15% off your first order. Go support Will, and by supporting Will, support us. Thank you so much.
All right, so since we expected the NRG results to consume the bulk of this episode, we decided that a nice way to round out the final portion of the show would be with some play experience, challenging ourselves to try out a few decks for the first time and basically share some of those experiences that we've had in those games. And to be honest, this was kind of a tough challenge for me. And maybe this is a good problem to have, because on the one hand, my only criteria for myself was I just wanted to play something that was arguably good. Things that we're seeing in tournament results. It didn't necessarily have to be a tournament winning deck, but just something that is respectable and people would recognize by name. And thanks perhaps in part to the podcast, I've played a lot of different decks. So it got kind of hard to actually like narrow it down to something that I've actually never tried. Dave, how slim were your pickings? Like, did you have to struggle at all to find a deck that you've never tried?
I mean, not really. Like we said, I decided to do Mono Green Devotion. I had played that deck on arena formats, with not Nykthos, so not really Devotion, just like Mono Green Ramp. But yeah, I wasn't that hard. There's a lot of different decks across the formats that I guess I haven't really tried. I think you were just looking for ones that you were going to be excited by, and so you needed to find decks with blue cards in it that you hadn't tried before, and that's where it gets harder.
There's something to that. I mean, I wasn't necessarily looking for blue cards, but yes, I wanted to be excited to try something.
For me, I was like, I'm going to try something I clearly hate.
Yeah, I probably should have done that. Otherwise, there were no like former rules to this experiment. This is me and Dave just trying to figure out how to plan an episode. And we decided any deck, any format, as long as it was to some extent new to us. As it happens, I picked a modern deck that has done well in some high-profile tournaments recently. Maybe isn't exactly a format fixture, but it's one that people talk about. Dave opted for one of the bigger decks in Pioneer.
Yeah.
Something that's really important for us to kind of get some exposure to, especially because we've been talking about it and we'll continue to talk about it in the future, I suspect.
It's not going anywhere.
Dave played Mono Green. I played Scapeshift. I'm going to go first. Okay. I was taking notes while I was playing. I only did one league, so I'm going to casually refer to my section as 5 lessons learned playing Scapeshift.
Oh, that's funny because that's my section is actually 5 things I learned playing Mono Green Devotion for the first time, inspired by the goblins, the way they approached goblins last week.
Oh, that I wasn't even thinking about that when I did this. And the specific Scapeshift deck I picked up is a shout out to one of my internet boyfriends, G. Ryan Donkin, who's been doing well with Scapeshift, aka Teamer Control. And let me just explain this deck really quick. The thing that drew me to it in the first place is that I've just never resolved a Scapeshift before. I've never cast a Scapeshift, never tried setting up big Valakut plays really. So it seemed like this is a deck that people talk about as a metagame choice to beat up on 4-color and maybe other strategies. Figure I'd give it a shot. I was also drawn to the Ren and 6 package here. I keep hearing how important it is to the format. I mentioned in the previous section that, playing a Ren and 6 deck seemed like a good approach. But otherwise, this deck is Lightning Bolt, Growth Spiral, Fire Ice, one of my oldie but goodies, Remand. It's a full 4 up
Remand.
here. Well, Remand. It is a combo control deck.
Did I ever tell you about the time that I traded a Force of Will for a playset of Remands when Remand was like $20 a piece? And then it immediately got reprinted Dave. 3 weeks later. Yeah. Dave. Brutal.
WTF. All right. It's got a playset of Dryad of the Elysian Grove, a few Arboreal Grazers, and then Expressive Iterations and Ren and 6. I'm not going to go into the sideboard. And then, we've got 3 Valakut main deck. This is Scapeshift, but it's not Titan Shift. It's kind of just, let's play good teamer cards, try to ramp out early with things like Growth Spiral to get lands on the board, Arboreal Grazer as well. And then even if you don't have the perfect suite of mountains out, Dryad of the Elysian Grove solves that problem for you. But even if you don't draw Dryad or it's answered, being able to cook with Ren and 6 every turn can eventually get to the point where you can set up a big Scapeshift play. So I'm going to go through my observations as well as my matchups. I register Scapeshift, a lands matters deck.
And then?
Round 1 opponent, red-green Ponza. Yeah, rough matchups to start the new league with. I went 0-2. I was able to cast Scapeshift a few times, but as I mentioned, it was essentially my first time casting Scapeshift, and I quickly learned that in this deck, you can't just, quote, cast Scapeshift. Scapeshift is not something you cast on 4, just willy-nilly.
I did it!
If you want to do anything meaningful with it.
I did it!
At that point, it actually basically does nothing except just change up what lands are on the board. And here's some just my stream of conscious moments and the thoughts. It kind of felt a bit closer to Indomitable Creativity than I expected, because you really need to set up a board state. And even though it does cost 4 mana to cast, you don't really want to cast it unless you have, in this case, 6 lands out or so, which in turn makes cards like Dryad, Growth Spiral, or in some cases Explore appears in these decks very important to just get there as quickly as possible. And they support your combo plan in terms of just setting up that big eventual play. And after match 1, I wrote, this makes me wonder if moving forward, I should try to approach this as a control deck first and foremost, rather than a combo deck, and focusing on maintaining parity or, if possible, an advantage until I identified that the coast is clear to cast a Scapeshift for just this 1 card, 1 turn kill spell. Lesson learned, don't cast Scapeshift on 4. You should actually know that you're about to win if you're going to do it. Match 2, Red-Black Scam. I went 0-2. My notes here are very brief. I messed up Scapeshift again. Maybe one day I'll figure out how to play it. Also, I got Blood Moon in this game. I got Blood Moon in back-to-back.
How much does it hurt you to just be playing all these decks that just lose to Blood Moon all the time right now, since Blood Moon is one of your favorite cards?
It hurts a lot, Dave. Hurts my soul. It's just one of those things that, just to harken back very, very briefly to the NRG top 8, Red Black Mid being a Blood Moon deck, I wonder if that's one of the things that it's making it good now in this soupy Ren and 6 lane line binding wherever possible format.
Yeah. I think it's definitely possible. I also just keep imagining you as the Wolverine meme where he's looking at a picture and then you see the reverse angle of him. And the picture's just Blood Moon. That's you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the error I made here was just like reading the card explains what the card does. And I did pick up like, oh, I can't cast Scapeshift on 4. Does that mean I cast it on 5? That doesn't work either.
You're like, wait, there's at least one more. I got to do it. I got to go at least one more. Can I cast it on 7? Nah.
I'm thinking, I guess you can cast it on 5 if you have Dryad out, because your Valakut is also a mountain.
So they see each other? Because you get more than one Valakut, right? That's the thing?
Ideally, yes. But at this point, I was like, okay, from now on, it's no later than 6, or at least having 6 lands on the board. In match 3, paired against Amulet Titan, 2-0, baby.
More lands.
More lands, yeah. So my initial question here is, am I faster than they are? And at this point, I felt like I was sort of starting to figure it out. And in fact, even won the match with Scapeshift. You don't really have good alternative win conditions. Like, this is a Scapeshift deck through and through. You're not winning the game with Dryad of the Elysian Grove beats. Your only other like option is Ren and 6 Emblem and just lightning bolt them into the ground, but that's not realistic. Ren and 6 buying back Valakuts, though, was more realistic than I expected because people are casting things like Boseiju to answer your early Valakuts. And if you can line up a Ren and 6 to get it down, tick up, bring back a Boseiju from the yard, that feels pretty good. This is also the match where I realized that the turn 2 spells in this deck are really important. Ren and 6, of course, is important, but just like holding up Remand, Fire and Ice for either removal or the tempo play, or Growth Spirals, and in some cases even Dryad, if you have a turn 1 Arboreal Grazer. All of these cards are just great on 2 and maybe even super important to the deck.
There are a lot of cards that draw cards, too. I mean, Remand, Ice, Growth Spiral, Ren and 6, essentially. I mean, they're all things that keep your hand full while you're doing your plan.
Yeah.
I mean, Explore. Yeah, there's Explore in this deck too, right?
It wasn't in the version I played, but it is not uncommon for these Teamer Scapeshift control decks to run some number of Explore. Yeah, so after tasting a bit of victory, I've decided, like, should I make my keeper mold decisions based on what I'm doing on turn 2? Because turn 2 is perhaps the second most important turn of the game for this deck, other than your Scapeshift turn. Is the theory that I'm like testing, right? Match 4, 5 color traverse. So here we are, our first Yorion matchup. Grateful to be matched up against it because anecdotally, this is supposed to be the good one for Scapeshift. My record, 2-0.
Bam.
Dave, I crushed them. It felt like there was nothing they could do, weirdly. It just wasn't close. I couldn't believe how few spells I needed to cast in order to just like win and maintain the advantage throughout the game before eventually closing it out with a Scapeshift.
Yeah. I mean, they're just really set up to kill creatures, right? Like that's what so much of that deck does efficiently. And so if you're killing them without creatures at all, then it's tough.
Yeah. And look, they can side into some number of counterspells.
Sure.
And in this case, like my game 2 of the match, I cast 1 or 2 Mystical Disputes. I cast 2 Mystical Disputes. There were 5 colors, and they played that Tuna Black card that you'll probably talk about. Maybe you won't talk about. You cast it against me when
Shadow
you were playing
Prophecy.
Creativity against me. Yeah, Shadow Prophecy. So they're playing that.
Oh, interesting.
So just like at one point, I spent a Mystical Dispute on that just so they don't get 2 cards, and I can maintain the advantage. And then some Veil of Summers to just back up my basic plan. Either casting it at the start of my turn before I cast Scapeshift to protect my Scapeshift, or having it as backup if like they want to get into a counter war. Those 2 cards was basically all the disruption that I needed to protect a plan that otherwise felt inherently strong against what, the Yorion deck is trying to do.
Right.
And in game 2, they had an Omnath on the board for 2 turns and they still lost because I got them hellbent and then I was just answer all of their other resources. And just this notion that Scapeshift is good against Omnath decks, it just felt immediately apparent to me. Maybe I got lucky. I'm not going to deny that that's possible, but Small sample size, big conclusions. I understand why people might play Scapeshift in a Yorian field.
Sure.
All right, so here my record is 2-2. It's time for the burrito match. All of my matches were 0-2 or 2-0.
That's funny. And how did this one go?
I got paired against Burn.
42% win rate Burn? Come on. You can handle that.
Yeah, but we haven't seen the MTG data grid about how Burn fares against Scapeshift.
Right.
My notes pretty lean here. I just wrote, oh no, not like this. I didn't really feel like I knew what to do. Renin 6 felt like a huge liability just because like I'm doing so much damage to myself, but it also feels really important to the overall plan.
Yeah.
It also
doesn't kill anything in their deck. That's the big thing, is that the -1 doesn't do much against Burn.
Doesn't do anything. I didn't have any spells that gained life. Scapeshift in and of itself is pretty slow. Like if I have to wait till 5 or 6 lands, like that's going to take a while. A single grazer can only slow them down so much. Yeah, so I got crushed. I went 2-3 in my one league, 50 PPs.
Nice. Half the PPs you're used to, I know. But it's not too bad down here with us in the 50 PP land. It happens. It happens.
I mean, yeah, like I had, I think, 260 PPs in my account, so I'll still count it as a free roll.
Hey, it's for the show. It's all a free roll if it's a show.
That's right, yeah. I did have a really good time. And even though my results polarizing, I felt like my matchups were pretty weird. Just like round 1 Ponza with Scapeshift felt like a what the hell moment. You know what I mean?
Right.
I can see the appeal to leaning into the control plan, since in a long enough timeline, Scapeshift just ends games by itself. But some of the specific control pieces did feel awkward to me. You know, you mentioned that they draw cards. Remand and Fire Ice just feel like necessary evils. When something like Counterspell or just a better cantrip would maybe be better. Like spending 2 on ice against a field that maybe doesn't care about taking turn 2 off to like lose access to a land against Scapeshift, which is a pretty slow deck in the first place. Like it just didn't feel like the most powerful thing I could be doing. It just kind of felt like the thing I should be doing. All right, so in the end, it kind of actually just reminded me of playing Emrakul Through the Breach once upon a time ago, just in its play patterns where you play some control, you play a single combo card, you win on the spot, you can be disrupted, yes, but your individual pieces are like good to great along the way. Didn't really capture my imagination though. I did not go out and buy Scapeshifts, which is basically all I needed to own this deck and paper, but I can see why others would have fun just honing the strategy, spending what seems like a lifetime tuning a few main deck cards to be able to play Scapeshift indefinitely in this format, trying to arrange sideboards for specific metagames. Like this is one of those decks that I think can endure and has endured for so long at this point. Wasn't for me, but I think it was a worthy exercise to just kind of understand like why is Scapeshift good against 5 color? What type of metagame is it actually good against? And at the same time, like why are people saying like don't play Scapeshift? It's really good in small,
very narrow meta holes, sort of. It's what a lot of good players say. Yeah, I mean that's interesting. You know, this is one of those decks that I've always looked at and been kind of like, would I do this? But I think that this is really outside of the play pattern of what I enjoy in Magic. Like Murktide is as far down this particular like control hole as I like to go, and then other than that, I'm kind of good. You know, so I never really, I never got my own Valakits, never got Scapeshifts. Yeah, it's sad to hear that this isn't the deck that would make me do it as well, but maybe another time, another place.
Tell me about your experiences, Dave. Your deck is really good.
What'd you say?
Your deck is undeniably really good.
Except for we just showed that in the meta at NRG, it only had a 40% win rate or whatever it was, and people are starting to really gun for it. Best deck, all that kind of stuff. So like Stan, like we talked about a number of times, I played Mono Green Devotion this week for fun, try to learn some things in Pioneer. For people who don't know or haven't realized, I kind of have always just hated big mana decks. So like Scapeshift has never been a thing for me. Green Tron has never really been a thing that I've enjoyed or enjoyed playing against. Don't really like Amulet. I've always kind of hated this deck, like Nykthos decks in general. So I wanted to give a try to something that I just didn't like, and especially wanted to give it a try since I missed the episode earlier this year where we had Todd Anderson on and you guys talked about Mono Green quite a bit. You know, it was kind of like when Pioneer was coming back to the forefront way back in July. And so we kind of know Mono Green is one of the best decks. It's definitely one of the most popular decks in Pioneer. It's been at for a long time, even before people came back to Pioneer. But weirdly, it's gone through an evolution recently that people have sort of just discovered, or it's just become much more kind of like the established list to do this thing where you actually use Oath of Nissa for the second half of its text, where before you really didn't, right? And what I mean by that is use Oath of Nissa to cast off-color planeswalkers. So this kind of started with the sort of memeable using Nicol Bolas planeswalker, the one from Amonkhet, as something that people were throwing in as a one of, because I think it's just had a lot of capabilities and it was kind of just a good value card to be able to cast off of Oath of Nissa. And then at some point, I watched a video over the weekend from TCG Player where the person talking about Mono Green Devotion talked about how the combo that was sort of discovered here at a certain point was with Pestilent Cauldron and all this stuff in the sideboard and Kiora and Karn and recycling them over and over again with the backside of Pestilent Cauldron was sort of accidentally discovered on stream by Canister, which is kind of interesting how that happened. But what's gone from there is that now there's a really much easier version of the infinite combo to be able to do using Teferi, who slows the sun, with Teferi's +1, where you get to untap a whole bunch of things on the board. So it kind of brings together this casting an off-color planeswalker with the possibility of infinite combo out of the sideboard with the rampy power of the Mono Green Devotion decks. So there's an infinite combo on top of this deck that was already good and annoying to play against. And Stan, how do you feel about the fact that this deck has an infinite combo?
Do you really want to know?
Sure, of course.
I think it's absurd and unreasonable for this deck to have an infinite combo. Like, it being a ramp deck, great. A beatdown deck, great. But like, it needs to have a way for other decks to like have a reasonable access to play against, and weaknesses too. And if you're just going to be able to like play a ramp beatdown game, and then if someone can beat that, you can just like surprise them with the infinite combo literally out of nowhere that's just kind of like shoehorned into your sideboard because of how good Karn is. Like, that feels like a broken feature to this deck in the format, and one of the things that I find least fun about Pioneer.
Well, there you go. Nailed it. I generally agree with this idea. Somehow, in all the time that I've played Pioneer here and there over the last couple of months, I really have avoided playing mono green somehow in many matchups, but taking it out over the weekend was really pretty interesting. I will say I'm going to talk more about my personal reactions to playing the deck than I am going to talk about like the strategy behind it. I think if you want to see the strategy, if you want to see the infinite combo, I'm not going to describe it here because it's many steps. Todd Anderson just released a video about 3 weeks ago where you can watch him go through a league on Mono Green Devotion, and he goes through the combo, plays through it, explains it. I think that's a great place to get really deep strategy about this deck. I think for me, here's what I think about me piloting this deck or potentially piloting it again after trying it out. So number one thing about this is that I kind of feel like this deck feels a lot more like solving a math problem or solving an equation than it does feel like piloting a Magic deck. It's almost like the play patterns in this deck are so scripted because it's so light on interaction and you can't really sideboard because the number of slots that you can have open for non-Karn fetchable cards or cards that you would rather just leave in the sideboard to fetch with Karn is super limited. Like, the list that I played only had 2 Voracious Hydra in the sideboard. And so I don't think that it's easy to pilot as a result of that, but I do think that you're generally just trying to do the same thing all the time, which is get out as much mana as fast as possible, hopefully find a way to either naturally draw Oath of Nissa into or Storm the Festival into your payoff cards, either assemble a a bunch of Cavalier of Thorns to kill people with, and Old Growth Trolls, or switch over to the combo if that plan's not going to work and just kill them. And that's like every single game is sort of the same thing. And a lot of that's because this deck is really uninteractive. Like, it's sort of the definition of an uninteractive deck. So that was the first thing. I think that the second thing that I realized pretty early is that, playing Mono Green Devotion in the past or playing these Mono Green ramp decks in the past, you kind of think that what you're really doing is going to always be broken stuff with the mana, but sometimes all you're really doing is trying to play as many Cavalier of Thorns as you can to just kill somebody or have in a position where the removal in the format's not really great at getting rid of a 5/6, all the time. And so if you play your cards right, you get one of those way out in advance. You have the ability to recover if they kill your Cavalier Thorns, and then maybe you finish them off with a giant Lair of the Hydra or something like that. So this bears repeating. It's a lot like Goblins last week, where it's not really always about the infinite combo. It's often about having the access to the combo if you're in a matchup that it's favorable, or if your just attack ground game just didn't really get off. Because I won plenty of games where, in fact, almost all the games that I won that people didn't scoop was, actually all of them, was just from attacking with creatures. So a lot of times what happened is that I would be in the position to have the combo, right? I don't totally know how to click through the combo online, but I would just be like, okay, I have Teferi out, and I have Kiora out, and I have Karn out, and then my opponent would just scoop. And I'd be like, okay, I guess I don't get to try the combo this time again. And that happened pretty much every time I had those cards out, or even sometimes 2 of those 3 cards out. Occasionally people would just scoop if I resolved Teferi, at the right moment when someone didn't have many cards and I had a couple of cards and I resolved Teferi, and people would be like, all right, I'm just done. Which is pretty interesting. So I never even really had to do the combo. I'm not even sure if I could click through it in all the order that you're supposed to, though I do kind of understand how it works in theory. One thing that's interesting about this deck is that the next thing is that I actually feel like one of the things that's kind of a bummer about this deck is that it has a hard time recovering from bad draws. Kind of mulliganing hurts this deck, even though you have a lot of tools to be able to draw through your deck with, probably what's Pioneer's best quote unquote best ponder effect in Oath of Nissa. You have Storm the Festival, which is essentially like a collected company kind of vibe. You get land cards off of Cavalier. So it feels like you're getting cards, but if you have to mull down because you have a bad opener, it's actually really hard to get ahead on cards again unless you get Karn, and then you can go get the Bankbuster card to be able to do that. And that card, let me tell you, it does draw cards, and it's reasonable, but it's expensive to get it going. It basically costs you 4 mana to get the first card off of it, and then after that it's a little bit cheaper. So it's weird because there's good, I guess this is one of those decks where there's good card selection but not a lot of card advantage, kind of. So it makes it harder for you to catch up in that kind of way. If you start off poorly, you're just kind of bad. This deck is pretty slow. You can get under it with a reasonable amount of expectation a lot of times, especially if people kill your mana dorks. We've talked about that. One of the decks that I lost to quite handily was Boros Heroic, where they just got an Illuminator Virtuoso up on 2. I had no interaction to do anything with it, main deck, and they just wrecked me. They hit me for 14 points on turn 3. It was just kind of okay. So I'm just dead.
Do you think that's the norm? Or do you think that's just because you had a slow start?
I think that because they can give that card trample pretty easily, it's kind of the norm,
Okay. Yeah.
You just can't always throw stuff in front of, or throw enough stuff in front of it. And even if you have, let's say you ramp out into an Old Growth Troll, and then they can just pump their guy up because you're tapped out, so they know that you're not going to kill their creature at instant speed, basically, is a big part of it as well. They ramp it up, and then they can just attack in anyway with a 4/4 double strike or something like that. So I think it has problems with aggro decks. I think really the bottom line for me with this is just I mostly did practice. I really only did practice matches with this. I won a lot of the practice matches that I did. I think I'd learned some stuff about how this deck works as part of that, but I don't really want to play this deck again. And so I would be happy to see it get less popular in Pioneer, just because I don't think it's that interesting to play. I much rather would play decks that are about interacting instead of what I really do feel like is solitaire.
Yeah. That's probably why so many people scooped.
Yeah,
right. It's just,
for sure.
It's just because it's a practice match and the stakes aren't there.
Yeah, people would have made me go through the combo if I had been in leagues for sure. But it's funny how many people were just like, nope, I'm out. But yeah, I mean, I don't think this is my kind of deck. And so the last insight that I would kind of share here, just by way of what my experiences were like playing this, is like, if this isn't your type of deck, I don't think you should go out of your way to pick it up. Like, your time playing your favorite card game is too short to spend like being something you're not, I guess I would say. So don't feel like pressure to play mono green just because it's the best deck or something. Find something else to do. Find something else that's equally unfun for your opponents, like red black mid range or something like that. My thoughts on mono green.
Cool. Well, we all learned something new today.
We learned something about decks, formats, and maybe even ourselves.
And I think it's time to wrap up the show on that note as we sort of dwell on our learnings, our identities, and whatever the future holds. Dave, this was fun. Let's just do another 2 for next week.
Sure.
Or at least let's not ask Shane to come back next week from his vacation early.
He doesn't. Yeah, we have this on. We have the covered, Shane. We have it covered.
Shane, you'll be fine. You spicy meatball. All right, that wraps up this week's show. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast. Get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. If you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review. We haven't gotten one in a while, and we know you, listener, right there with this show in your hands and ears, you haven't left a review yet. It takes no time at all. Drop one for us. We'd love to see them. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can do that on Twitter at The Dive Down. Also email thedivedown@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can join our Patreon over at patreon.com/thedivedown. Shout out to manatraders.com for sponsoring our show. If you use promo code TheDiveDown15, all one word, you'll get 10% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards. And also, you can get some amazing shaving soaps, body soaps, fragrances, and more over at Barrister & Mann using promo code TheDiveDown15 to get 15% off your first order just in time for the holidays. Barrister & Mann makes a great present for all the fragrance aficionados in your life. And save some money on paper cards over at Nerd Rage Gaming with code DIVE8 to get 8% off your order from Nerd Rage Gaming. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, see you later, Dave!